I'm going to be doing a brief recap of my trip to Charlotte, North Carolina for the Magic the Gathering Regional Championship in the United States. It's actually almost a mirror image of what happened last time. I went to Washington, D.C. The format was Pioneer. I qualified playing Pioneer in the qualifying season with a blue-white control deck, and I took a very similar deck with some modifications. I guess you can't quite call it very similar because I played Lotus Field at the RC, but I played normal blue-white control at the RCQ, but very similar archetype. This time, during the modern qualifying season after that, I played Bring to Light Scapeshift in the qualifier and won, and took that same deck with only a few modifications, so it wasn't like a archetype shift. And then I took that to the RC. And then my record and the way it played out was almost identical. So it's kind of interesting about that. One thing to notice is ever since they started doing 2 regional championships for the United States instead of 1, what I was wrong about is here the Pro Tour invites only go down to the top 32. I think it went more. We went to the 44, top 64, one of the two. And first place was 30,000. So the prize pool is smaller, but there are 2 per season instead of just 1. So obviously combined, it's a lot more. And that's because ours is the largest region of those regions. So this is just kind of a look at what the payout structure looks like. So the Pro Tours and the next regional championship qualifiers is for all the above plus, as you can see here, plus down to the top 32. And if you can make top 128, you get another invite to the regional championship. So I think that's still pretty cool because the regional championship, it feels like a mini Pro Tour for your area, whether you're in Europe or United States or wherever you are. You have to qualify to get it. You can kind of keep staying on the circuit. The prize pool is not bad, and it feeds into larger tournaments. So that's pretty cool. I'll be going over the matches and everything here in just a moment. But I go to North Carolina, and right outside the convention center, it's in the middle of downtown, which was very different from when I went to DC. This is a view from the hotel. I actually did a little better at booking it this time, and I got something that was in walking distance. You can see here where it says NASCAR Hall of Fame. This is part of the convention center, so I can see it right across the street from the breakfast bar. So got a little breakfast, went to the RC. This is Friday. And one of the things I like to prioritize, of course, is the artists. This is the first time I've seen Rob Alexander come back. Now, I think he went at a few in between the ones I haven't gone to. But the line for this particular artist was so long. It was basically impossible for me to find time in between what I was doing. And they pulled out, I didn't get a photograph of it, they pulled out tape to line where his line would go. And one of the main reasons, one, he was already well-known, high-demand artist, but he does a lot of land. Lots of lands, from the old days to the new days, and everyone plays land, so it makes sense that he would have the most playable cards of all the cards. So that was cool that he came back. This is right before I go downstairs. So this convention center has a downstairs area, and that's where the actual convention hall was for SCG Con. And right above it was the Starbucks, so that was kind of nice. And you could actually bring your food into the convention hall center. It's not something you usually have with convention hall centers. They make you go to the concessions, the overpriced concessions. But you could actually bring stuff into this one. This is just a photograph of me in the command zone area. I can't remember if this was before or after the RC itself, or my participation in it, I should say. But I was smart this time, and I bought the command zone pass prior to going, because last time I was thinking, oh, well, I'm going to play in the RC, so I don't want to spend $80 to play Commander if I'm going for another reason, and I don't want to expect to lose. Well, that time I did lose. And I went to go buy it, and it was sold out. So I definitely learned my lesson, especially for the Friday before. It's a whole day before the RC even starts. Now, I spent my priority, I should say, most of my time, because it didn't take that long, was getting any extra cards I needed, making sure my deck list was ready, submitted. I wanted to wait till submission deadline in case I wanted to make any last-second changes. But there was still a lot of time left in the day, and so I played some Commander. So that was pretty fun. And I did end up losing, so it was worth my money. As I went around, usually I take a lot more photographs or videos of the convention hall, but they kind of look the same. I just took a quick picture of this one because this was the most expensive card I noticed. I didn't really look very hard, but I think it's a beta Black Lotus. I'm not sure. Beta Alpha 9 Black Lotus. Pretty cool to see it signed by Christopher Rush as well. So this was me in the players meeting. You can see me kind of panoraming around there. And of course, I'm up in the red tables where the top players are because my last name starts with D, which is high in the alphabet. And you can't really see very well, but this is me right here. This photograph came from Star City Games page. So I got it to zoom up a little bit. There's me sitting there with my Pepsi Zero, and I got one of these backpacks that had wheels that I could roll around. Because this time I actually brought trade stock to sell and everything. So I thought that was pretty cool. That turned out to be a good investment because I didn't want to carry the bag straps on my shoulders the whole time. I just kind of rolled it around every now and then. So they, as usual, they come out with badge. This time it was the art from Force of Negation. And this is the list I submitted. I did make some last second changes. So I'm going to be going over that when I go through the matchups in the deck list. But here is what the metagame looked like. It's about what I expected, especially these top 4 strategies. Now, I know you're thinking, why would I pick the deck I wanted to play if it's not the greatest matchup against the number 1 deck? Well, as you will end up seeing, well, I may not go over the top 8 here, but Breach dominated everything. So it's not like my deck had any better of a shot. But one of the reasons is, 1, I'm pretty experienced with the deck. 2, I thought the next several matchups were not bad. And I do play against all of it except for Eldrazi Ramp. Instead, I ended up playing, I guess it's not on here, one of the others. Played against like an Affinity Brew. Yeah, I don't see that on here. So day 2, the numbers for Breach go up even higher. Titan passes Ramp just a little bit, and Energy. So mostly consistent, but Breach just dominated. And it's probably because of this RC, it'll be catching a ban. Now, it was probably going to catch a ban anyway, but like this was sort of the nail in the coffin. But we'll see how the European Spotlight Series goes after that. Now, here is the list I ended up submitting, which is mostly 99% what I was going to submit anyway. The only thing I did last second was I did end up adding the Leyline Binding, which I don't know if that was right. So I was on 4 ending, Prismatic Ending. I was on 3 Jace the Mind Sculptor, which I think was right to cut down on one of those. And then 2 Snapcaster Mages. So I shaved 1 of each of those and added 3 Leyline Binding. If I like added everything together, not from this specific event, just the deck, that was probably correct. Needed some more instant speed interaction. One of the things that made me change at the last second was I was thinking through some of the matchups, and I love 4 Prismatic Ending, and I may try and fit the 4th one in. I was like, man, how do I deal with Murktide Regent? How do I, I was thinking about that, and I didn't have as much instant speed interaction. So even if I don't add the 4th Prismatic Ending, I think it was probably right to play Leyline Binding. One of the reasons I said 2 of the main reasons I didn't want to play it. 1 is I didn't construct my deck to be the 5 color mana base. I just have the 1 swamp in Xander's Lounge here. And so what it would do is, needing the domain, I would have to fetch my lands in a certain sequence consistently to play it for 1 mana. And that's something I didn't want that play pattern in my deck. I didn't want to build it around Leyline Binding. The second reason is Leyline Binding has liabilities, which did come up at least once or twice in my matches, where they could just, in response, kill it before the trigger resolves and the permanent never leaves the battlefield. So I tried that. I can't remember against who. I think it was against the Breach deck. So that was one issue. But I think I was right to play it because even at 2 mana, it's still pretty good. And I'm always going to have the 4 colors. So even if I don't have it at 5, I think it doesn't really make a big difference. Now, aside from that, I think the rest of the list I like because it was my like generic list. I think my section of bullets here were good. Honestly, the one Scapeshift in the deck was never an issue of finding it. Planar Genesis was as good as I always wanted it to be. I never felt like I needed more Jace the Mind Sculptor. So I think 2 is actually right, even though I liked 3. So I cut down on 1 also because I ended up cutting completely the Madcap Experiment package in the sideboard because Burn's at kind of a low point, and there's just so many ways to deal with it. It's just not as good as it used to be. So the need to put it back in the library is lower. But Jace still serves a good role at putting back a lot of the clunky bullet cards, too many mountains in your hand, drawing Valakut, stuff like that. So I think it's still good in the deck. But the one thing I was struggling with was the mana base. So having run in 6, I can't like not play Boseiju, especially with where the meta's at now. And I think I was right about that. But the one thing I was struggling with is I had to make enough room. I like cut something because I had too many cards. And ultimately, I ended up cutting Breeding Pool. Now, it sounds crazy, but it was between Breeding Pool, one of the basics, or a mountain. So one of the mountain cards. So I thought it through for a bit. I was like, I could go to 9 mountains. I could cut a spell, go up a land. That was one thought. I could not play the Seiju. That was another thought. So I went through a lot of possible options. This is what I landed on. Here was my reasoning. I never needed turn one untapped blue green. I would only need turn one untapped white or green. Now that could maybe be different post board with consigned to memory, but that was my thinking. It's like turn one white for prismatic ending, turn one green for Veil of Summer. I suppose I could have blue, but I would never need both. Especially game one, I just never needed turn one anything but white for prismatic ending. And so it's like, well, if I don't need that, I can turn one fetch out the Hedge Maze, which is the blue green Surveil land. I don't need that untapped. So I very rarely have a turn one play. It's usually just land go. And so if it's not prismatic ending, which is white, so I kept in all the other turn one untapped white sources. If I was gonna need 4 colors, I could go get like a Sacred Foundry, prismatic ending your guy, or sorry, not Sacred Foundry. I could get blue white or green white. But if I have no turn one play, I just get Hedge Maze, right? So that's my logic. I really wanted another non-mountain Surveil land. So I was thinking about blue white, another thing. Couldn't make room. I didn't have enough room for Breeding Pool. But Hedge Maze into untapped Sacred Foundries, all 4 colors. It still gives me red and green on turn 2, which was a big thing. I needed red and green on turn 2. There were a few situations where it was like playing the game, and I did want Breeding Pool because I also have access to Elegant Parlor. So similar sequence. So if I want to untap and go green red for Ren 6 on turn 2, I need Breeding Pool. So I haven't figured out exactly how I want to do that. I don't really want to go down any fetches. I'd prefer not to go down any mountains. It seems like a 10 is right. There's been a lot of times where I've had 4 mountains on the battlefield, no Jace, or like one gets discarded or milled or something. So that's like one situation that's a little tricky. Some last second changes I made to the sideboard was adding a Guy's Blessing, and I barely found it when I was scrambling through the vendors because it's such an obscure uncommon. But I found one particular vendor which I basically did all my business hacks. I had everything I needed, which was nice. I have their card somewhere. I wish I could give them a shout out, but I added the one last second Guy's Blessing because I was kind of doing some last second research, realizing Mill was at an all time high in the last several months, and my deck's a little soft to it. And it's like, what do I do? So this actually seemed like a really nice hit, and I think I cut a Veil or something. This was a card. It's a weird version of it, but Wrath of the Skies was a card I was kind of like back and forth on. Did I actually want to play it? Did I want to play Beza in case I ran to burn? Which I'm glad I didn't because that was not a well represented archetype. And I think I like the sideboard I settled on. Wear Tear is good, just I think in general as a card. It's good against a lot of Mox Opal decks running around, but it's also just good against Urza Saga on turn 1 or on turn 2 if you're on the draw. It's one of the most efficient ways to answer it, and it could be a 2-for-1. So very excellent card. I do still like the deck. I think a lot of my issue was actually my performance, and I'm going to go with over why and how those matchups went. I spent a decent amount of time preparing in terms of research, getting my deck list and everything, but I've been busy with other stuff. I haven't actually been playing the game very much in the last couple months. So my gameplay was not as sharp, and I think that's actually what led to my downfall. I don't really think it was the deck. Almost all of my losses were winnable. So I'm going to start by going over round 1 here. I played against, of course, Breach. Go figure. When I was sitting at the players' table, almost everyone around me was playing Breach except for one Merfolk player. And then round 1, when we went to our seat for round 1, I played against Breach, and then each other of my opponents had a Breach either mirror or play. So Breach was just everywhere. So he was playing a pretty stock list. He had Chart of Course, which was a little unusual. So it looks like he was not playing Malevolent Rumble, which, of course, I think Malevolent Rumble is a much superior card, but I'm sure he had his reasons. And can't complain. I mean, he has access to green, so I'm not really sure what his reasons are, but he beat me anyway. Okay, game one. Let me see if we both kept our 7. He wins the die roll, so I took a few notes. Rams with his Moxes, plays Tameo, so he just accelerates really fast. He plays a Needle on Renin 6, which I never actually drew. Then he plays Breach. He goes for the win. When he activates Grinding Station with that on the stack, the untap, I have Boseiju in my hand. Boseiju's Breach buys me a couple of turns, actually. But I only get to like 5 lands. I don't think I find anything, and he eventually just finds another Breach and wins the game. Game 2, he mocks after he plays Tameo. I think he misses a land drop. I said, I don't counter with Consign. I was holding it for Mox Opal, so I don't counter his Amber. And I think that the mistake there is on his turn 2. He was only playing the one. If you look at his list here, he has the one Teferi Time Raveler. Now that card is very good against my deck. It turns off my consigns, which my plan was to consign his Thassa's Oracle trigger to win. But he draws his one of Teferi and then plays it off his Mox Amber mana, bounces his Mox Amber to draw a card, replays Mox Amber for an untapped mana. And so there I was like, well, when he played the Mox Amber, I didn't consign it, and now this consign is dead. So that eventually leads, like, I can't deal with the Teferi in play, and then he eventually finds Breach, but he waits until he has double Breach and then wins the game. I think this was one of the rounds where I go to a main phase binding his Teferi, and then he has Wear Tear, and he wears the ending with the trigger on stack, so Teferi doesn't leave the battlefield. So Breach just beats me. I think that was the mistake I made, is not countering my first opportunity for anything that trades Mox with Consign. But I was thinking, oh, Mox Opal is his better Mox. So that was kind of my thought process there. Okay, round 2, I play against Mardu Energy. Now, this was a matchup I thought I was pretty good at. Now, this is interesting brew. He has his Omnixiluses, which I guess it's Mardu Energy, but Energy. The generic energy package has Guide of Souls, Osla Pride, Flage, etc. Now, he's got Bowmasters because he's got black. Bowmasters is like good and not that good against my deck. It's good in certain situations against my deck, but okay. I thought this was going to be a good matchup because they're not like a super fast clock. A lot of the cards just don't matter against me, which is one of the reasons I like the deck I chose. Graveyard Hate doesn't matter. Removal doesn't matter. Just a lot of these cards just don't matter. So game 1, it's kind of going that way. So game 1, I lose it. I roll again because that's my luck. My opponent keeps 7, but he has no turn 1 play, which I'm like, great. He gets an Ajani on turn 2. He goes to dash a Ragavan, which I remanned. My shock lands start hurting me, though. I've got a shock land mana base. I was taking like 3 or 4 damage per turn. So, I still got to get to 7 lands. I'm not playing a whole lot of ramp. So I'm like, that's when I'm starting to realize, I'm like, maybe the format's like a turn too fast for my deck to be high enough tier. I get close to Scapeshift. I think I get to 6 lands, but I didn't quite get there. I binding his Ragavan. He then plays a Static Prison on my binding, gets Ragavan back. I cast Bring to Light at 2 life. Okay, so here's the critical turn. I'm sitting at 2 life, and I'm like, okay, I either get a Flage here, or no, I think this is with 5 lands, so I don't have 6 lands. So I could either get Flage, or I could get Omnath. I have not played my land yet, so I'm thinking, okay, Omnath gains me more life. Flage kills an attacker, but only gains 3 life, and no blocker. So I think about it, I'm like, well, if I draw a fetch land, that's like best case scenario, I can gain the most life and have a blocker. I think that was the wrong decision. I end up going for the Omnath play, and this is where my play sharpness was low, because I should have clearly known the game has gone on for a while. He probably has one of his Galvanic Discharges or even a Thraben Charm in his hand. He had a bunch of lands. It was a lot of draw go, nickel and diming each other. And these are his dead cards against me. So the odds that he has one's pretty high. He's just sitting on cards in his hand, like maybe 2 cards in his hand. But I don't think about that. So I decide to get Omnath. And when Omnath comes into play, I have to play my land to gain my life. Well, normally you have priority first, you play land, but he has a draw trigger that goes on the stack. So my opponent stops me, and he discharges. And I think he had at least 1 energy in his reserve. So he Galvanic discharges my Omnath. And so with the draw trigger on the stack, Omnath dies, I draw my card. And yeah, I have a land. But now I'm at 2 life. and I have nothing. So had I gotten Flage, I could have killed one of his attackers, gained 3 up to 5, and he would not have had enough. He did not have 5 power after I killed an attacker. I can't remember his exact board presence. One of them was a Ragavan, but it wouldn't have killed me. It would have given me a draw step. And then I think I had the other Bring to Light in my hand for the win. I could have gone for the win. So I lose game 1 because I make the wrong play there. Game 2, I am on the play, and I have Chalice on 1 on the play, which is great because he has a lot of 1-mana creatures. He has Guide of Souls, he has Ocelot Pride, he has Ragavan, he has Static Prison, he has Thoughtseize, he has Galvanic Discharge. So he has a lot of 1-mana spells, turns a lot of his deck off. So I go turn 1, or turn 2 Chalice on 1. And that does slow down. He just says, like, draw a go. I think plays into Johnny, but he's stuck on a lot of cards. But he does eventually find a Wear Tear, which he did bring in against me, which was another reason I don't, if I could not play Leyline Binding, I would, because when they see bindings, like, oh, this stops binding. And it's like, it also stops other cards I want to bring in. So there's more liabilities. But slowing it down buys me enough time. I cast a binding on his Guide of Souls after he kills that, when he goes to play a second one. So he gets no energy and no life. So he's really slow. He's getting a little flooded. I play Omnath. I go over 23 life. And when he draws his last land, I've got too many resources. He scoops. Okay, game 3, I'm on the draw, of course. He has no turn 1 play again, which is exactly what I want to see. Like, turn 1 Guide of Souls or Ragavan is like the last thing I'll see. But he gets a Johnny and a Guide of Souls. I take a few hits. I cast a Flage on turn 3, kill his Guide of Souls. I think I sat on that decision for a minute. I'm like, which one do I kill? I choose Guide of Souls. I think that ended up being right. He then end of turn plays Bowmasters, and he ends up having double Bowmaster in a game where I have no card draw. So Bowmasters was like kind of weak. I untap, I play Supreme Verdict, kill all his tokens of Bowmasters. He top decks another land, so he gets flooded again, and I just escape Flage and I kill his last creature token. I think it was a creature token from Bowmasters, and then just Flage and play, and he drew another land, and he's like, okay, you win. So that was my 1 win. So I'm 1-1, lost to Breach, beat this deck. After having the ability to win game 1, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling all right. So then I go against Orzhov Blink, and I think, okay, I think this is also a good matchup. This is another reason I wanted to play it. A lot of his cards are just dead against me. I mean, they've got creature removal, they've got Graveyard Hate, 2 things my deck doesn't care about. So the way game one was pretty fast. He has a lot of removal just sitting in his hand. He's got like Solitude and maybe Fatal Pushes in his hand and Marches, and these cards just do nothing. So I'm like playing a land. He has slow threats, kill 1 threat, tap down a thing. Like, it just doesn't matter. And eventually I get to a land and kill him. Okay, game 2 was similar. Now his sideboard cards, the cards I care about are Vindicate and White Orchid Phantasm. Now I gotta be careful with these cards because they, blinking White Orchid is a problem. So I was aware of this because it's an open decklist tournament, and I was trying to play around it, but eventually he gets Ketramos down. He gets Ketramos plus Relic, and he starts drawing a bunch of cards. This is after a White Orchid dealt with one of my lands, and I think I killed it. So I'm not down a land. But he gets so many cards, and he's like kind of hit me for 2 or 3. I get down to like 2 or 3 life. I cast Supreme Verdict and kill his creatures, but Ketramos survives, and now there's just too many, because Ketramos is indestructible. So there's too many cards in the exile, so he can now attack. And I kind of forget that Ketramos is indestructible. I did. I'm like, oh. But there's really no other option I think I have there. Yeah, I don't think I had any other option. Game 3, it was similar, but this time he gets Orchid early and flickers it after trading. And we're attacking. And so this was the big punt. So this is game 3. I'm at 6 lands. I find my land. He hits me down to 2. I had a fetch land in play. So I break my fetch land. I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to win. So I have fetch land. I have Scapeshift in my hand. Not Bring to Light, but Scapeshift. So it's double green. I'm at 7 lands. He has nothing. And, or he has creatures in play, but he has no card, like nothing to stop my Scapeshift. This is my big punt that I think ruined the tournament for me. I fetch. I go down from 2 life down to 1 life. I just go get a land. I go get like Hallowed Fountain tapped. I untap. Now I have Planar Genesis in my hand. I just need any land to win the game. I could draw land, I could find one off of Genesis. Any of that works. And I thought to myself, I'm like, well, I'm at 1 life. No, I don't think it will. I was at 10, he hits me for 8. I go to 2. But I see the winning line, and I don't actually change it on my life pad. So it still says I'm at 10, I get whatever. So I'm at 2. I have enough to fetch. I go get a land, I untap. I have 2 green sources, and any land wins the game. I don't draw the land, but I'm like, well, I've got this Genesis digs for deeper. So I play the Genesis, even though I don't draw the land. I'm like, that's okay. Play Genesis. I go 1, 2, 3, 4. I see 2 non-lands, a Stomping Ground, and a Boseiju. So I'm thinking, for some reason, don't reveal Boseiju, but it's game 3. What does it matter? He's seen my deck list. What does it matter? So I'm just looking at it, and I'm like, oh, excitable. So I take it. I'm like, I look down, and I realize I only have 1 green source. So I'm like, oh, I have to play this untapped. So just in my peripheral, I'm not actually looking at my electro bind. I was like, oh, I'm at 10. I go to play it untapped. I'm like, oh, wait, I'm at 1. I can't play this untapped. There's where I punted. Well, it's actually the second punt, because before, on the end of his turn, before my turn, I could have just fetched for a tapped green source, but I get Hallowed Fountain for some reason. Punt number 1. Punt number 2 is my deck actually gave me the one of the 2 outs that I could have top decked at 1 life, which was Basic Forest or Boseiju. But I don't take the Boseiju. I take the stinking Stomping Ground. Huge punt. I just was thinking, oh, I have the win. So I just threw the game away. It was just interesting because I knew, for some reason, I knew there, oh, I need to take it into my hand rather than put it into play tap because I need it untapped. But I don't like sharply play enough to realize I'm at 1 life. I can't take the shock land. But my deck gave me the Boseiju, which was an untapped green source. So I actually would have won that, would have been 2-1, went to a different bracket. The tournament would have been way different. But I lose. I'm like, well, what a punt. What a punt. Round 3, I play against this Affinity deck. Now, this was a matchup I think was totally winnable. And again, I don't know if I didn't have a punt quite that bad. But game 1, he was on the play because I lose every die roll. And I don't remember the specific thing that happened. He gets an early lead with playing Urza Saga tokens. Hits me a couple times. I make a few land drops. I can't remember exactly what happens. I didn't take notes on this one. I was pretty upset about my punt the last round. But he eventually has, when chapter 3 hits on the second one, he goes and gets the haste card. And I realize, oh, he has haste. And then I win. Or then he wins. But I would have won the next turn. I was like, oh, he has the haste. Game 2, I get a Chalice on 0. And it slows him down for a bit, but eventually draws Wear Terror and kills it. And I slow him down plenty with my cards. And then I kill him with Scapeshift. So he just didn't have enough of a clock. He also had some counter spells, which did matter a little bit. But game 3, he had a slow start. And I was like, oh, I think I got him. So I'm killing some of his stuff. I think he gets an Emery engine with Mishra's Bauble to draw cards. But then he plays a Kappa Cannoneer. Turn 3, I think. I'm like, oh, that's not that bad. And I was wrong. Kappa Cannoneer was a problem. So I couldn't kill it, and it was unblockable. And that card was a problem. But I think I also didn't draw anything, and then he just kills me in 2 hits. So that's when, even though I wasn't out, I could have went runner the rest of the tournament. I realized, like, at this rate, it's not worth it. So that's when I dropped him at Play Commander. So anyway, the overall thing is that I actually think this deck was good. I think it's not like top tier. It's not tier 1. I think the format is 1 turn a little too fast, or maybe half a turn too fast for this to be a much better deck than it could be. I think there's a small change I should make in the mana base. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I'd like to get a breeding pool in there. I'd also, even though I don't see how it's possible at this point, I'd like to fit 1 more non-mountain surveil land. But I would take the breeding pool first. So I got to figure that out. But I actually think this list is pretty tight. I think you probably just should play Leyline Binding. What's interesting is the biggest downside of Leyline Binding this tournament wasn't the interactions I talked about. The color situations were not that bad. So I was kind of wrong about the play sequencing. The ability for it to like be removed and get their thing back, that came up a few times, but that wasn't as bad as I was expecting. Honestly, the worst thing about playing Leyline Binding was your opponent's knowing to bring in things that stop Leyline Binding, which can also stop like Chalice of the Void. So that was probably the only real downside. But other than that, I actually think I think adding Leyline Binding, or at least 3 more interaction spells of some kind, counter spell something, probably Leyline Binding though, was correct. So that part was correct. And because I went up on Leyline Bindings, I went down to 1 Snapcaster Mage. Although Snapcaster Mage as a 1 of is worth playing, and it's just like if Scapeshift gets stopped or discarded, Snapcaster can do it. Remand was an interesting thing that a lot of people it might seem weird as a card, but it fits the deck's overall theme of just its ability to interact. It's just slowing the game down to get to the 1 spell that kills you. Remand is good at that. It churns through your deck. It feels like Time Walk sometimes. Now there is a card called Reprieve from the Lord of the Rings set. It's white, does the same thing, but instead of countering the spell, it just returns the spell to its owner's hand. And that is better because it gets around things that can't be countered. The problem is that's a white card, and the deck has more blue mana symbols than white. So it's a little harder on the mana, but the deck's already much heavier on white playing cards like this and Leyline Binding. So maybe that's worth the change, but either way, that was my event. It was still a ton of fun. And if you're still watching this point and you haven't, make sure you hit the subscribe button.